Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of 5 Minutes with a Fisherman. We ended our last episode helping us to see why Peter was writing this letter. The ESV Study Bible is really helpful in that it shows us that there's a twin theme running through the letter. The first is hardship and the second is holiness. You see, holiness is needed for hardship, and hardship is the way in which we are made holy. I like that. It's an easy way for us to remember what is the theme of 1 Peter. Remember, we also said that the letter is written to the elect exiles of the dispersion. Chapter 1, verse 1. Let's pull on that thread a little bit more today. Who are these elect exiles of the dispersion anyway? Well, they were both Jews and Gentiles. Jewish converts on the one hand. They would have had a history with Old Testament traditions. And on the other hand, you had Gentile converts who, as you might guess, were probably pretty rough on the edges. Both having converted into followers of Christ, both were exiled and dispersed into a hostile world. And Peter takes pen in hand to write to these people, an unlikely band of brothers, to encourage and strengthen them in the hardships of life. But while we know that it was written for Jews and Gentiles living in the early 60s AD, we also know that the Bible was written for all believers, and its message transcends the years and the customs and even the hardships, which means that even though we're not exiles living in the first century, and even though our suffering isn't apples to apples with theirs, it does mean that this little letter has something to say to us in the midst of our hardships today. You see, this letter has something to say to us as exiles living in this world. No, now we're not exiles who've been tossed from our homes like these first century believers. But yes, we're exiles, aliens, strangers, the scripture says, living in this world as we make our way home. And that is the problem, isn't it? We are too easily comfortable here, living in this world. We forget that we're strangers and aliens, and we forget that this is not our permanent residence, that we're citizens of heaven awaiting our future hope. Our gaze is on the future while we live in the today. And this makes all the difference between the believer and the unbeliever. We will suffer just like everyone else. Matthew 5 tells us God sends rain on the just and the unjust. Sure, the Christian suffers right alongside of the non-Christian. Same suffering, and yet everything is different, because this is not our home. And so Peter is simply walking us through how are we to live in this world while we await our future home. The message of 1 Peter is not grin and bear it. It's not deal with it. It's not hang in there. The message of the letter is bigger than those cliches, and it's better than those cliches. Are you facing hardship today in the midst of this pandemic? Brothers and sisters, this is not your home. Live in this world, but recognize you're just traveling through. That's the hardship theme of the letter of 1 Peter. But remember, there's two major themes, and the other is holiness. And it's in hardship that the Christian is made holy. Now, when I say holy, I'm saying that we are being made to be like Christ. That's the goal of the Christian life, isn't it? We're growing, we're being sanctified, we're being transformed to be more and more like Christ. That's what we mean by this word holy. We increasingly become more like him. Old habits change. The way we used to think, act, dress, talk, or whatever it might be. All of who we are is being made and conformed into the likeness of Christ. That's why Peter says in 1 Peter 4, verse 2, he says that we no longer live for the passions, for human passions, but for the will of God. Then in verse 3, for the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality and passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. With respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you. You see, Peter is saying, in this world there will be suffering, and that suffering will bring about a Christ-likeness. So I want to ask you, leverage this pandemic. Or maybe the way John Piper might put it right now would be this: don't waste your lockdown. You see, there's a certain way we as exiles are to live in this world as we go through the hardships of life and we await our future home with Jesus. And friends, that's why we want to spend 5 minutes with a fisherman named Peter. Thanks for joining with me. Have a great day.